Good morning. Okay, today we're going to be doing something a little bit different, and I'm not really going to be talking about like other people's tech, but we're going to be going through my tech. And basically, the gist of it is I am CTO of a natural disaster startup. We basically do assessments on people's properties for safety purposes, and then we give them action items on what they could change or improve on so that in the event of a natural disaster, they have a better chance of keeping their home. So, what we're basically going to be doing today is we've had a Squarespace site set up that we've really been reiterating on. We've just been like testing our business idea, and now we're kind of moving into a more solidly formed idea of like what the product is, what the code base is going to be. We're also pivoting a little bit. And so for the past week or so, I've been building a assessment functionality code base. And so basically what that is it's just a Flutter code base, and there's just like assessment functionality for us to be able to put in like wildfire assessment, hurricane assessment, flood assessment, like on a database, and then the web app pulls that down, takes the user through it, and then calculates a preparedness score and then also their action items. So I built the gist of it, and I want to go through like what our Squarespace site looks like, some of the UI and UX considerations that I'm thinking of, a little bit of what I want our design to look like, and then we're actually going to run the code base, take screenshots of it, and then go in on Figma and then write a little bit of what we want to have changed. And then I'm going to show it to my co-founder, and I'm basically just trying to show you the process of like, what do I think about when I'm designing a product? What do I think about when I'm programming? How do I consider like safety and accessibility and like all of these other things that are really important, especially when building stuff that's like very safety critical. So first and foremost, I'm going to start by showing you guys what our demo survey looked like on our Squarespace site, a little bit about how that process flows, and then also some of the like design vision like things that I had. So this is the Faura Squarespace site. It's just a quick demo survey. And so originally what we were doing is we were making and executing wildfire prevention and mitigation plans for HOAs in California. And so the gist of that would be a neighborhood comes to us and they say, hey, we want to spend this much money, we want to mitigate this many homes. And then we would basically collect all of their data, collect the residents' data, and then apply for grants for them to reduce the overall cost by up to half. And then we would give a wildfire mitigation plan to the board and be like, hey, this is what we think that your HOA could do. Here's a little bit about your like risk and your preparedness. And then we basically like get contractors in and get them to do the work. So where we kind of landed on that is like, it's a really good and needed tool, but HOAs just aren't the like distribution channel for it like we thought they would be. A lot of HOAs, as you might imagine, are very political, and it's just not necessarily a super easy sell. And so we assumed that like, okay, like if we do the work in bulk, the work is going to be more effective because more people are doing it. But it turns out that the work is actually harder to get through. And so we're kind of taking this approach of like, okay, what if we just go to individuals and we automated this whole thing and we gave them assessment plans directly and then connected them to contractors and like all of these other things. So that's what the code base is. So this is a sample of the resident survey. This is all to the defensible space guidelines. So it's stuff like, do you have any dead and dying trees? Do you have high-risk vegetation species? Everything like that. And this is a little bit of a gist of what our mitigation plan template looks like for HOAs. Not going to get into that because trade secrets. However, that's just a little bit of the gist of like how we were setting stuff up. So what I've been building for the last week is really like the main like consumer facing assessment kind of like module for our code base, right? So right now we're working in wildfire. Long term, we really want to branch out to like a bunch of different natural disasters like hurricanes and floods. And we think there's a lot of different applications for this kind of technology. And so what I've really been doing is trying to build a scalable, clean code base that basically takes in any assessment. So the idea is like we would have just like assessments living in a database of like, this is a wildfire assessment, this is a hurricane assessment, and then the web app would pull it. It would take the user through those steps, and then it would grade them and give them like an action plan. So in terms of like accessibility, and this is something that we really want to think about and we're really putting a lot of effort into, but like different people, different ages have different accessibility needs, different ways that they use software. I think eventually I would like to have us build some sort of like an SMS option for people who maybe like are elderly or like they live in rural areas and they don't have internet, where they can just take the assessment through SMS and then get their action items through there. But in terms of like the actual design, and this is a little bit of why we chose Flutter, is it just needs to be to the point, clean, accessible. And so we chose Flutter, and we chose Flutter's material design system because Flutter is like, I think it's a great choice for startups as a tech lead. It's very high distribution, very like low barrier to entry for people to learn. It also really comes with like this built-in material design system, kind of like, I don't know if you guys have ever had to deal with custom UI components, but when you build those, you also have to build in all of the accessibility semantics, and then you have to do voiceover testing. So it's a little bit of a pain in the ass to be accessibility compliant and to build custom components. And for us, I was like, I don't really think we need to do that. And so what we ended up building was just this Flutter code base that we're going to compile into a web app. I feel like consumer like facing surveys don't need to be in a mobile app. I think that reduces the conversion rate, and I also think it's kind of a waste of $99 a year aside from what you would save on server costs. But other than that, I'm just not a fan of like one-time use software in the context of a mobile app. Like I think web apps should be like maybe one-time use, and then mobile apps should be like consistent usage that someone needs like at a glance. But I'm imagining that like people who take our survey probably won't be taking it more than 3 to 4 times a year, if that, right? So in terms of the design, it just needs to be clear, it needs to be accessible, it needs to be coherent, it needs to be like just very straightforward. And so when I was doing our brand ideation, we recently did a rebrand. I really focused on making it like very generation agnostic, like chill colors, like appealing to Gen Z, but also to baby boomers, but also to millennials. Like we just have such a broad range of like people that are going to be using this, hopefully. So it's very gen agnostic. So that being said, let's actually run the code base. I will just warn you, it is all mock data, and it is not the actual assessment, and there are some curse words in here. So just do with that as you please, but we're not connected to a database, and there's really no reason to be. So this is just like testing the actual like logic layer of the application. So I'm gonna show it to you guys, I'm gonna screenshot it, and then we're gonna put it in Figma and discuss what I think we need to do to get this basically like out the door just for preliminary user testing. Okay, so first and foremost, you see this screen where it just says welcome to Faura. You have the standard like lorem ipsum, and then you have a button that says mitigate your house. I already have some thoughts, so we're gonna take a screenshot and then we're gonna drag this dude in here. Actually, JK, I meant to go into this. So we have our first screen, and so we click mitigate your house, and then we see these prerequisites. And the reason why we have these prerequisites is because sometimes the surveys and the assessments that we're going to show change depending on different aspects of your house. So for example, like defensible space can really be from your house to your property line. So oftentimes we'll ask people, or we're anticipating that we're going to ask people like, how far does your property line extend? Is it like 0 to 100 feet? Is it like 0 to 300 feet? Is it 0 to 1,000 feet? Because those determine the kinds of questions that we have to ask people to better prepare them. So that's what this prerequisite questionnaire is about. As you can see, it is just fake data. And I regret to inform you guys, I actually don't have 99 bitches. It's quite sad. And then here's the digital assessment. It's, as you can see, it's like classic, like Flutter layout, but basically here's all of these questions, and then like pressing these buttons determines like your answer to the assessment. So screenshotting that as well. We really only have one page here. And then boom, this is a result. This is all fake data. None of this is like actually linked up, but the assessment part is working and it is grading, which is all that I really care about. As you can see, it basically gives you an overall grade. It gives you subgrades for like the different sub items, and then it gives you action items specifically. So, okay, we have a lot to go on and a lot to tackle. So I'm going to close that code base. So I have battery on my computer, but as you can see, it kind of like steps through all of the items, and it's like, oh, like getting the assessment, getting the pre-requirements, returning logic requirements, creating a report, saving the results. So that's really what I wanted to build like above anything. So we're gonna close that out, we're gonna close this out, and then we're gonna open these and drag them in here. So okay, let's see if I can do half and half with this. No, I'm not available in the split view. Okay, so we're just gonna do it like this. Figma, please make this available in the split view. Okay, so I'm dragging them in order, and then I'm gonna make little notes on the side. Where did it go? There it is. Damn. Pretend that I'm a good designer. Okay, so here was kind of like our vision for the prototype. And I really didn't like focus on the UI and UX. It was just about like the substance actually within the product. But the gist was, it was supposed to be like, I live in this city, I'm worried about this disaster, I'm looking for this, and I can do this level of effort. And then we kind of abstracted that further into, because we're just focusing on wildfires right now, I live at address and I want to check my home's readiness for disaster type. And then same thing, it's like before we get started, we need to figure out what to ask you. How long does your property line extend past your house? This is the survey view. Something that needs to be programmed that we don't have in there is like this little example page where it basically shows people like, hey, here's what we mean by this question. Because a lot of it is like very industry specific speak that a lot of people might not necessarily know. So for example, like we'll have questions along the lines of, do you have any aerial fuels on your property? And then an average person would be like, what the hell is an aerial fuel, right? So we want to have something where it's like aerial fuels are just like leaves or other debris that's like dangling from trees and stuff like that. So there's that. There's also this kind of camera functionality that we haven't necessarily worked on yet, because I don't think we need to for very early stage. Codebase is like a week old. And then the actual like home assessments and their grades, and then their action items with the ability to email, text, and go on to the next steps. So, okay, I'm gonna full screen this. Let's go into the actual code base and take a look at it. So first and foremost, I think something that is missing here is like visuals potentially of like what it actually is about. I would also say that we should replace the lorem ipsum with actual survey text to prepare the user for what they're going to be going through. Maybe, I don't necessarily know if this would be helpful, potentially like adding statistics about wildfire and loss, right? So I think the function of a landing page does really two things. And I think the first is like, first and foremost, you need to establish trust with the user and you need to give them a reason to trust you. And then I also think you need to immediately provide value to them in a way that's actually tangible, right? Because like if someone's like, hey, take this wildfire like assessment survey, I'm going to be like, well, I actually don't live near wildfire, I don't know shit about wildfire, and I don't care. But if we kind of frame it as like, hey, welcome to Faura, we're a company that's aiming to reduce the loss of life in natural disasters or something like that. And we have these statistics like firefighters will actually like leave homes to burn if they don't have defensible space work completed because they're too hard to save. So something about that. I also maybe want us to actually like add the orange gradient back for some branding, and then maybe add the Faura logo. On second thought, I really don't think that I like the orange like title color. I don't really think it vibes with the I don't think it vibes with like our brand guidelines, quite honestly. Maybe a little bit. I don't know. I'm kind of stuck on it, and I don't know if it passes color contrast guidelines for accessibility. So maybe change header color, and then also this button. I'm not going to be too much of a bitch about it because it's a material design button and I don't want to fight with material design, but maybe like lighter font weight / gradient, question mark. So that's what I'm thinking for this. And so we could maybe come back to this. We could also potentially like link this to additional resources, but I don't necessarily know like how helpful that would be. So that might be like an A/B testing thing that we do further down the line, but that's just a general idea for right now. Okay, so let's get into the prerequisites page. Now that I'm like kind of reading it, I think that we need to figure out how much of your house to ask questions about. Like that doesn't make sense. So probably, where did my text go? Reword that. What? Bestie? Oh, okay, I need to bring it forward. Sorry. What? Where did it go? What is going on? It's a ghost. Are you crazy? Oh, it's because it's not in here. Hold on. There we go. Okay, so I'm looking at the picker. I think I like the picker. Maybe like make tan background lighter so it blends in more as a non-interactive backing. I think something that's really important for designs and just for like user understanding in general is a consistent interaction, consistent interaction guidelines, right? So some example of this, and I'm going to open up like Astra's, or I'm going to open like Brenna's file, which is my nonprofit and a software that we work on, but I think it's like relevant to show. So something that our head of design did a really amazing job of is building this interaction system where you can really clearly tell what is meant to be interacted with and what is not, right? So you'll notice a lot of these layer backings are different corner radiuses. They don't have borders. They're like kind of more background elements, whereas you can very clearly tell, okay, I need to interact with this because it has an icon and it's more rounded and it's darker. So there's kind of like a very clear, this is pressable, this is not pressable. And I think that's something that I want to improve on here. So maybe like there's a specific saturation, maybe adding a border to this button overall or making it a gradient and kind of having the expectation that gradients are interactive. So adding some sort of like very simple interactive guidelines that make it more clear. I need to reword this. Honestly, I feel like I don't know if I want to mess with it. I'm a fan of like keep it simple, and then if it needs to be improved, then go back and do it. Okay, so for this, I definitely have thoughts. I think first and foremost, my kind of like interactive guidelines feedback still stands. I think something else is like a lot of people, when they're going to be taking these surveys, I'm assuming, or I'm like imagining actually in hindsight, that I don't want it to be like you have to click yes or no. I'm imagining that I want the default to be no. And here's why. A lot of these surveys are incredibly long, they're incredibly boring, and most people don't want to have to press no every single time. And so I also think on that end, it's not very user friendly the way that it's stacked. So maybe instead of this, I would use like a really long switch component or something else where it would just be like, do you have branches within 10 feet of your stovepipe? Switch on for yes, and then switch off for no, and then automatically have them all set to no, right? So change to a switch component. And I also feel like with these buttons, you probably could tell from the actual like walkthrough that we did. You can't really tell when these buttons are being like pressed and when they're not, right? So how do you know what yes is versus no? So that's also a thing. Yeah, so I'm imagining changing that to a switch component. I think the move forward button is fine. Maybe change that CTA to get results. Change to create plan. So there's like a very specific there's a very specific end value that the user sees, right? It's not just like, oh, move forward and there's more steps. It's like, okay, let's actually create a plan and let's get you going. And then something else is there's no progress indicator here, right? So somebody doesn't know how many questions they've done, how much of it has been filled out. So adding a progress indicator bar/circle element, and then maybe like digital assessment. I think that actually needs to be header style and change to wildfire. Yeah, I don't necessarily know. Let me see what it was up there. Yeah, so originally there actually wasn't just like anything. It was just like, do you have a smoke alarm? So maybe instead it would be like wildfire assessment, and then do you have a smoke alarm? This can be a body, and then like a switch component. Like just imagine that there's a little tiny switch here and it does everything we want it to do, and that I'm a design genius and yeehaw. But yeah, so we will have to see about that. Yeah, basically just like a switch component of like switch it on if it's yes, switch it off if no. Okay, so going back here, bing, 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 bing. What else? Oh, and then also adding examples/explainers. This one's going to be a little bit hard because we have our example views and our example like items within the code base to have an image, because I feel like just describing through text is not a great user experience. So potentially like add example buttons to text survey element and fake images. Okay, so there's that. Something that I'm thinking about, this is a little devious, something that I'm thinking about is it's really commonplace actually for it's commonplace for web apps to have, or I guess just consumer applications in general, to have like fake loading screens where stuff loads instantaneously, but they'll actually like have a screen and it'll have like a predetermined amount of time and it'll be like crunching the numbers, but it's actually not linked to any kind of computing or any kind of like networking thing happening in the background like you would typically imagine with a loading sequence. So the reason that people do that is because they think like if something is taking more time, that means it's hard for the computer to do and therefore it's more valuable a little bit, right? So it's like, oh, if you get the results instantly, it's like, oh, that was so easy. But if you kind of like have a 2-second wait, you're like, wow, this thing is really crunching. Like it's really using a lot of computing power. So it's a little bit of like a fake signaler to the user. And I also think it's like an experience and a way for the user experience to be just more entertaining than it otherwise would be, right? So maybe there's like a loading circle and then it like shrinks and then it pops and then it's like your results. And it's more of an experience compared to create report your results, you know? So I'm thinking about that. It's obviously not really necessary because there's not a lot of compute power going on in here, but maybe that's just like something that we have for funsies. So I'm gonna also put like potentially add user holding cell as like a midway point in between this like survey. You did the survey, you get a little pop of dopamine because you finished it. Congratulations, you're so good. Thank you, user. And then boom, your results. Okay, almost done. Let's do your results page. So, okay, there's so much going on here. So, okay, I previously discussed this with Valkyrie, who is the CEO of the startup, and she's my co-founder. And basically, one of the really good pieces of feedback that she gave me is like, we're probably going to have a lot of action items for the user, and some level of prioritization is going to be pretty important in that. So I think this is actually like a code-based change and not necessarily like a design change, but add like severity levels. And so also as we like further develop the algorithm, like we could weight stuff according to the severity, right? So like, let's say if you have a house and you say like yes to cedar roof, and then you say like, let's imagine that you have like two different items and they're both like very different in severity, right? So like, let's imagine you have leaves on your porch, but you also have like a cedar shake roof. I personally would classify both of those as important, but the cedar shake roof is really bad, especially in wildfire areas. So obviously we would want to label that as like more severe and more like pertinent to fix, right? And so also I think one of the things that's important to consider about this is like there's going to be a lot of people from all of these different like economic backgrounds and from all of these different abilities who are going to be getting these action items. And if someone who doesn't have a lot of money is going to get an action item list of like 100 things, that's going to suck, and that's going to make them feel like shit, and it's not going to be very like productive to actually fixing the problems. And so I think there needs to be some sort of like, here are the most important things just in terms of risk. Here's kind of like what's nice to have, but it's not like life or death. And then here's like stuff that you should be doing, but if you can't afford it, like it's totally fine. So some level of severity / classification. And then also these are just individual items, and obviously the code base is very Boolean. It's like, do you have branches? Yes, no. And grading is more of a fuzzy, grading is more of like a fuzzy, what's the word? Grading is more of like a fuzzier classifier, right? So fuzzy classifiers are not binary yes or no, but they're like, yes, kind of, maybe a little bit, I don't know. So I don't think actually that we should have grades, and maybe just have like yes or no indicators to kind of recap like what our users told to us instead of grades. I also feel like, once again, like kill the orange. I'm like, I don't know. I don't like how this is formatted on web, but so maybe something that we have also is like on web, these would be side to side, and then on mobile, these would be stacked. So we already have a dynamic stack element in the code base which does that. And so it would be grade and then action items side by side, as opposed to grade action items. Because I think like, I don't really like the visual like look of this. To make items side by side. I also don't think that I'm in love with the orange. Change orange to a lighter tan. Woo. And then also like your results. Obviously I want to change the grade circle thingy because ugly, sad face. So there's that. I also I don't really like the your results. I'm trying to workshop in my brain what a better way to phrase that would be. So like, if I'm closing my eyes and I'm going through the software and I'm getting the report, I would potentially like it to say like, risk assessment report, here's what we think could be improved on your property based on the answers that you gave us. Please consult with local contractors for further opinions and implementations, or something like that. So up here, like changing the actual content of header, bing, 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 bing. And then also, I think this is important, is like adding a button to save these results / email them, right? Because obviously people are going to be getting these. They're going to be like, oh, okay, like I should probably do something about that. So I want to make it very easy for them to be like, hey, honey, our property is going to burn down. Can we like do these things? So potentially something where it like saves it into an image, or it formats it into like a SMS message, or it just kind of like formats it into like a text box that they can copy and do something with. But I just want to give it a clear way of like, here are these action items that live on our site, to action items that you can share with your family, maybe with your roommates, and actually like get stuff tackled on with. So I'm trying to think, and maybe like there's also some higher level stuff that I want to do. I don't necessarily know. It's hard to like, especially when you're doing MVPs, it's hard to look at it and make all of the changes that you want to make while also being very lean, and while also being able to iterate on it, because you don't want to polish something and then send it to users and then, okay, you have to scrap it immediately, right? Which is why we initially launched with a Squarespace site. And so I think what I'm trying to cognitively think about in my mind is like, okay, instead of thinking about this from like a MVP to like a full fidelity like product, what do we just need to do to get to the like beta testing part, where people can just like go in, use this assessment, feel good, and then give us like actionable feedback on what we could change about it. So as I'm looking through and I'm going back, I think like first and foremost, just like telling people, hey, this is a survey, this is what we want to do, making these minor UI changes. But I realistically think like everything that I really care about now is just like, does the method of assessment work? Like what really needs to be done in between this digital survey and this results thing, right? It's a very long survey, so I'm a little worried that people are going to not finish it. It's going to have a fall through rate. So maybe we also experiment with like different ways that people can respond, or we have it set up where, I don't know. I'm just like kind of thinking out loud right here, but I'm hoping the default no and then they switch to yes is potentially going to cut through some of that. But unfortunately, these surveys are long because they require us to be thorough. And if we set it up to the point where like we would take an image, we would have to get somebody to review that because AI has kind of like a high false positive rate. And then it wouldn't be this like instant survey thing. It would be like, oh, you submitted this photos, like you're going to get your report in like 48 hours, right? So I'm trying to think of like a way to just make the survey as easy as possible with as much like UX gravitas as possible, so that we can increase the completion rate and then like get people to an actual report that they can use to fix their homes. So, okay, I also lied. I'm not going to take this to Valkyrie and I'm not going to show the changes in the video because I already think this thing is so long. But I hope this gave you guys a good insight on what it's like to actually build an early stage product, like what I'm thinking about, how I go through this stuff, how I think about this stuff, and just like what the actual reality is of being a CTO at an early stage company, which is basically just like looking into the void of the computer and being like, does this font make people want to kill themselves? So I hope that was a good explainer. Thank you all for listening to me ramble and for listening to me talk about the product. Hopefully at some point you guys will be able to sign up to beta test this and to hopefully see if your home is going to burn down. Hopefully this report will tell you that it does not. But aside from all of that, thank you all for listening to me. I hope you have a good rest of your day, and also stay safe and stay healthy. Goodbye.